Hello, world. Welcome to another broadcast. I am, I guess, now your twice in a week host, Sam Lichtenstein, one of the directors of analysis. You're stuck with me today again. However, I'm happy to be here with a much more interesting colleague of mine with a much more intense headset, really putting mine to shame. Scott, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Scott Cardis. I'm an Asia Pacific analyst here at RANE, and I do like my headset. Thank you, Sam.
I mean, it's really intimidating me. The what makes me feel better that I'm going to admit to the world is Scott told me he's at his new IKEA desk, which I'm pretty convinced is going to fall apart while he's doing this. Scott tells me he has a number of screws left over, so something's missing in that
Yeah,
design.
it's functioning for now, so hopefully it stays for at least 20-30 minutes. And then
All right. Well, we're not going to go that far. I want to warn our viewers, but we do have plenty to cover. Obviously, we put out our second quarter forecast 2 weeks ago. I was here with Ryan last week. Scott, we were talking about updates in the Middle East, North Africa. Scott, you cover for us very intensely the Asia Pacific region. And so we thought today we'd first get an update on what is going on with the knock on effects of the Ukraine war in Southeast Asia, and then pivot a bit to talk about something a little different, which is what's going on in terms of Australia's military rearmament strategy going forward. Two very different topics, but things that you've been looking very intensely on.
yeah, a lot of times, people look at the war in Europe, and it's almost like the butterfly effect. Butterfly flaps its wings, and suddenly there's a tornado across the world. Almost that intense, actually. We see there's a lot of knock-on effects of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's one of the biggest exporters of sunflower oil in the world. And with those exports being halted or disrupted, a lot of countries are now turning to other sorts of cooking oils, such as palm oil. Now, Southeast Asia is the largest producer of palm oil, specifically Indonesia and Malaysia. But because there's less cooking oil available, more people are trying to buy it, which is driving up the price. So places in Southeast Asia are struggling to they're struggling to buy this. The Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. Indonesia's had to institute a number of price controls. And these are just basic commodities. These are basic goods that people are very angry and upset that they just can't get. And it's not that, there are shipments being sunk or anything like that. It's just there's just not enough supply to go around now that there isn't sunflower oil. Countries like India are trying to buy this up, and they're struggling to get their supply going. So you see a lot of these impacts going on with just cooking oil. And not even to mention, we have the issues of fuel prices. We see fuel prices here in the United States. I see people complaining all the time about how much it's costing to fill up their car.
Yeah, I won't tell you what my parents filled up in their car yesterday in Florida. I understand it. It
Yeah,
broke the bank.
yeah. See, I'm very happy I roll with the BMW, the bus, metro, and walking, so I can kind of avoid those high fuel prices. But fuel prices here might seem really high, and in America we have subsidies, but in Southeast Asia, for example, having a 30-cent increase or 20-cent increase can literally break the bank for some of these people who, they're at their limit. They're at their marginal consumer. They can't increase their budget to buy more gas because then they just can't buy their food. And Southeast Asia fuel prices are kind of getting out of control, and countries are trying to institute price controls. A lot of subsidies are going in place to help mitigate this on the consumer end. But it's a pretty tedious moment for a lot of Southeast Asian countries worrying about
Yeah,
this.
I mean, joking aside for ourselves here in the United States that are able to stretch our budgets. I mean, as you pointed out, for a lot of these people that are already living really, truly, trying to make it through every day. If you even increase some of these really just basic cooking oils, we're talking about literally a requirement just to live, the basic food that all of a sudden is now in jeopardy. So I mean, have we started to see protests, unrest? I mean, what are there have to be some grassroots pressures growing, I imagine.
Oh yeah, there's been some protests in the Philippines, mostly with jeepney drivers protesting in Manila and the surrounding, for lack of a better term, suburbs and cities, satellite cities. Jeepneys, for anyone who hasn't been to the Philippines, are pretty much your primary mode of transportation. You can go flag one down for however many pesos it costs. It's been years since I've been in Manila, but you just kind of grab one on the street and you just hop in one and go, and they take you six blocks, 3 blocks, however far you want to go. And if their fuel prices are going up so much so that some of these guys have, you know lost 50% of their income after their fuel, after their overhead costs, just because of fuel prices. And they can't survive on that. When you're bringing home, used to be like 20 hours a day, let's say, and now you're only bringing home 10. That's a pretty big cut. It's just imagine, your price, your paycheck in the United States being cut by 50%. You know, so I can't imagine that. So it's being squeezing a lot of people. That's for
And I
certain.
know the Indonesian government basically took, I don't know what, like 4 steps and then stepped back and then re-stepped forward, trying to figure out what on earth to do here. I mean, just bluntly, like, is there any near-term solution here, or is this basically just going to have to press through until we can get more supply?
The unfortunate factor, there is real no near-term solution. The only solution you have is to stop driving, but in the absence of robust public transportation, which doesn't exist in a lot of Indonesia, I don't want to say all of it, but a lot of Indonesia doesn't have robust public transit. So how else are people going to get to work? How else are people going to go to the store or just get around? And while we, again, like you kind of mentioned, we're kind of a little luxurious in the United States, work from home, we have a little more stable environment to do that. A lot of countries don't have that option. So, you have to go drive somewhere. You have to get out. You have to take the jeepney. You have to drive your car or vehicle or however you want to get. And that's just making it more and more difficult. Countries are trying to, subsidize fuels as best they could to help alleviate that. But in the short term, there really isn't a solution that I see, unfortunately. In the good news, if you're a very big environmentalist, this is kind of driving a big shift away from a reliance on oil and pushing green energy, which is becoming a big deal in Southeast Asia because people are very worried about climate change. And this is kind of showing governments and people, hey, maybe we should kind of get away from these cars and go into more electric vehicles or sustainable fuel sources.
Yeah, I mean, just remarkable when you consider the third, fourth, et cetera, effects that this conflict is having. Obviously, there are a whole host of other reasons why creating a sustainable fuel model in Southeast Asia is going to face numerous challenges, but like that's a whole conversation for another Facebook Live. Let's not go too
Yeah.
deep down that rabbit hole. I will pivot to a different part of the region. Let's talk about Australia, because this is, I will be candid to our viewers, a completely different topic. However, it's one that you've been talking to us a lot about in our morning meetings, and I think it's super fascinating. Can you just catch us up to speed with what on earth militarily is happening in Australia?
Yeah. So Australia's been really ramping up their military, not in the sense of like taking military action, but they're ramping up their military acquisitions. We saw the AUKUS deal where they kind of threw out the French diesel submarines and they wanted to buy nuclear submarines in agreement with the United States and the United Kingdom. And that is significantly expanding their naval capabilities or their tactical abilities to go further than just their more immediate Oceania, Southeast Asian region. And they expanded their they're going to I think like almost double their military size over the next 30 years. They are expanding their military acquisition. They bought a lot of self-propelled artillery howitzers from the South Korea. They bought Black Hawk helicopters from the United States. They're increasing their air force and naval capabilities. And a lot of it is because current Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been saying, he's pretty hawkish on China. And he wants Australia to take a far more hawkish stance to push back against rising Chinese action and territorial claims in Southeast Asia, South China Seas especially. Australia is very, very interested in keeping the free and open Indo-Pacific. They're very worried about was it about a week ago, China signed the agreement with the Solomon Islands. Actually, it was like Monday or Tuesday, I think. Sorry, time's kind of blurred together for me in a lot of ways. But yeah, Australia's been just kind of modernizing, rapidly accelerating their modernization. They just announced the other day that they're going to move up the timetable and acquisition of missiles for their planes, air to surface missiles, and also missiles on their destroyers to kind of just give themselves longer reach, more tactical capabilities to kind of push their strategic defense goals.
So, as you said, even in pushing up these timetables, they're obviously going to take years, if not decades, to do some of these things in terms of nuclear acquisition, missile acquisition, et cetera. So, what are we thinking is kind of the near-term outlook, particularly vis-a-vis China? Like, should I be worried that Australia and China are going to go to war tomorrow? That doesn't seem to be the case. So, more realistically, then, what's kind of on the table?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're not going to see Canberra and Beijing declaring war anytime soon. Neither side wants that. But a lot of this is, and this isn't in a vacuum. A lot of other countries are kind of coming out of COVID, realizing we really need to keep our military ramped up. They see the issue with Ukraine and how Ukraine got invaded by Russia, and they're worried about another large neighbor who's been claiming territory, and they have territorial disputes. We could expect to see more. I don't know. Incidents maybe is the best way to put it. A few weeks ago, we saw a Chinese destroyer lock on their laser to an Australian surveillance plane in Australian territory, but the Chinese destroyer was in international waters, and Canberra got really, really mad about that. While that seems like kind of like, oh, who cares? It's kind of a big deal in the political and military sphere. If you lock your weapons on somebody, that's,
Certainly, I mean, symbolic, if nothing else.
yeah. So we can expect to see some more incidents similar to that. We'll probably see some more naval spats over, oh, your destroyers are going through my waters. No, we're in international waters. A lot more arguments with that. We're going to see more political friction with between Australia and China. Although with the upcoming election, that could change because there is the election that is due by, I believe, May 21st, off the top of my head. So hope it should be announced within the next week or two when the exact date is for Australia. So we could see a slight change in attitude, but like you said, these militarizations, they take years, and we're not really going to see Australia suddenly next month go, oh, haha, no, we're going to cancel all those orders. Then you don't just cancel orders like that. It's
And I
really not
mean,
good form.
in some context, I would raise the question of could a future government just completely undo all of this? But it seems to me that the Australian populace in general has come around to a more hawkish view of China. Obviously, the Morrison government has been particularly hawkish, but compared to, say, a decade ago, where China was seen, I would say, more as a great economic partner, it seems to me that in general, the Australian populace has been turning away from that and seeing it more as a strategic competitor. So even if you had a new government that comes in, say in the next election or beyond, there doesn't seem to be any room to really have a massively accommodating stance towards Beijing at this point.
Yeah, and part of this too is the way Beijing has been posturing. You've been seeing a lot more flyovers, a lot more rhetoric, bellicose rhetoric towards Taiwan. You see the continuous absorption of Hong Kong, and Australia's been pretty vocal about that. The biggest thing in the past week or so was the Solomon Islands security deal. Australia is not happy with that, and even New Zealand, which has been very much hiding away in the corner, for lack of a better term, especially during COVID.
I think that's the technical diplomatic term. That's what they refer to it at the United Nations.
Yeah, yeah. Even Jacinda, the Prime Minister Jacinda, said, "Whoa, this is kind of a big deal. We need to start taking a more active role and approach in this." And that's starting to cause a lot of concern because the Solomon Islands control or can control a lot of shipping, and it's right next door to Australia. This isn't something that's happening several thousand miles away, up north, near Vietnam or South Korea or even Japan. This is something
Scott,
that's
could you
happening
actually
right on
just
the doorstep.
remind us exactly of what this deal was? Because I'll confess, I
Ah,
think
yes.
most viewers may not even know there's a place called the Solomon Islands, let alone what the deal we're talking about here is and why it's important, more importantly.
Yeah, so the Solomon Islands are just kind of an island chain just north of Australia, more kind of off the coast of Guinea, the north/northeast uh, border, I guess, for lack of a better term. And they just signed an agreement with China that allows Chinese forces to come help with any security issues, and they will also allow Chinese naval vessels to dock in Solomon Island, a specific or certain Solomon Islands ports to refuel, refit, whatever naval vessels might need to do. Now, Australia has an agreement with the Solomon Islands. They recently sent troops, I believe, in November to help quell unrest. in there due to there was unrest over the voting and the changing of Solomon Islands recognizing Taiwan, and then they changed from recognizing Taiwan. Now they recognize China and Beijing, which is kind of a big deal because Taiwan's losing friends in the region. And this deal just kind of says now Chinese boats can dock, across the street from Australia and New Zealand, and that's concerning for a lot of ways. It's almost like if the Cuban Missile Crisis, not that extreme. There's no nuclear weapons there, but it's similar to how
it's a Friday, Scott. I don't need that kind of stress in my life. Don't put that in the universe.
Yeah, I don't need that either. But it is similar to the sense that America looked at Russia saying, "Whoa, you're putting stuff in Cuba. That's my backyard. That's across the street." That stresses me a lot. Similar, not as high, not as heightened tensions with, like I said, there's no nuclear weapons. There's no missiles to my knowledge being put there. But for Australia's security stance, having an unfriendly nation that has their navy that can dock real close to you is very concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, this really just takes me back to childhood playing that great board game Battleship. Obviously, the stakes are slightly higher here than, beating my mom in this game, but I still think it's just fascinating how all these things are intertwined. I mean, the idea that Australia has some calculations vis-a-vis China based on Russian activities in Ukraine. It's just wild to see how all these things interact. And I know you and the rest of our Asia Pacific team, and of course, the whole analyst team are doing an incredible amount of work on this. So for those viewers that are interested, as always, you can visit us at worldview.stratfor.com to sign up for more of our analysis from individuals with great analytic minds like Scott and the rest of the team that's looking at all these issues across the globe. So again, come visit us, worldview.stratfor.com, and have a great rest of the weekend.
Have a good weekend.